So let's get started. So Harshal, if you can scroll it to table of content.
Okay.
All right. Let's go with the first assumptions and the user constraint section.
Okay.
So from the problem statement, right, it's exact same that we went over in the class, trying to identify which is the business problem they're trying to solve it. So when you look at the assumption and user constraints, any specific questions, anything that trip any one of you?
Let me go to that section, I think.
Yeah, just page 3. Yep,
that might help.
Yeah. I have one question, sir.
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead, Nitin.
Okay, so on a first page, there is a dates like version 1, version 1.1.
Oh, okay.
Here,
So I have
okay.
a very small question. Actually, I don't think it is important or no. This is like 4/29/2008, 1.1.
Yep.
So is that date is like
Oh,
right,
you can just ignore it. Should be 4/29/2009.
2009 should be right?
It's probably typo. But
Okay.
again,
Yeah.
any of those version, this is one of the older projects
Mhm.
that we had conducted for one of our clients. So the document is from there.
Yeah, actually,
So-
why I'm asking you because I thought it should be after like
Yeah.
1.1. It should be after. So I just wanted to make sure. So sorry.
No, makes sense,
Yeah.
but it's a good catch. Those are the things you guys should be watching out for. Anything out of ordinary, right? That you should be questioning.
Thank you,
I
sir.
saw, sorry to interrupt.
Sure, Judy, go ahead.
I saw a connection between the first page here and the first page in the system design. Okay,
Okay.
some sort of a relation. Okay, so
Are you
maybe
talking
we'll come to
about,
maybe we'll go to that later. Okay.
are you mentioning a problem statement, Judy? And
No, what Nitin said. Okay, the first
oh,
part.
I see.
The dates. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
There was.
Yep.
Okay.
Makes sense. Yep. All right. Okay. So, yep. Go ahead.
Let's go to the assumptions, right? Any questions? Anything that you guys were confused about on this assumptions?
1.1. So for the assumptions, I didn't understand how to apply the C's to it. Well, most of these I read through it, but I just didn't understand how to apply the C's and the T.
So think of it, assumption is setting the context in a background for your rest of the document and the context for how the system needs to be built. So themselves, they are not the, I would say, the requirement. It's the environment, what they're asking it to set it up. So when you do 3C and T for the actual functionality, then you need to make sure that A, that is accessible through internet, and B, it is accessible or running on the Windows Azure platform, right? So when you go in, this 3 was specifically targeted for IT development team who was going to build the system. Okay. So you're going to see it like this in most of the document. There will be first couple of sections that will try to set up the environment or the context, just like what you had a business problem statement in 1.0. That is setting the context, giving you a high level overview of what it is.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, Harshal, if you can go to section 1, 2.
Okay.
Any questions on the terms that it used here? As Harshal mentioned, right? One of the key things that you all should get familiar or used to it is whenever you encounter any term that you're not 100% sure what it means, I would say start with the Googling to get a little bit more understanding of what it is, right? So when you think about it in this particular section, right, there is a PAS and IAS are the two terms used it. Did everybody understand what those means?
No, I did not get what is that.
Did you try to Google it?
No.
So I would recommend Google it, read it a little bit more. But if you recall it,
Perfect.
when I showed you the diagram for compute platform, remember, like I said that there is an application layer and then there is an operating system, and underneath that there is a hardware. So if you think about it, the hardware and operating system, that's typically known as a compute platform. And PaaS is nothing but the platform as a service.
Yes.
What it means is that you just essentially rent the machines along with its operating system environment from Microsoft. Then it's a PaaS platform or cloud. And then if you're trying to do it in infrastructure as a service, essentially all it provides you is the basic hardware environment, and then you still need to build the services and configuration on top of it. So there are multiple cloud-related platform and environments that I strongly encourage all of you to look into it. There is a platform as a service to infrastructure as a service to essentially software as a service or application as a service. There are a whole bunch of other variants are available that you should get familiar with it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
All right.
Yeah, I have a question. So,
It's done.
yeah, so with 1.2, do we have to like set anything up, or is it just like the cloud?
It's the cloud, right? So what it is saying is that when the application is built and it's deployed on the cloud, on the Azure cloud. So remember, we said that there are some non-functional requirements, which talks about what should be your compute platform and compute environment should be. So 1.1 and 1.2 combines to give you some view of what the non-functional operating environment is going to look like. Okay.
So when we are doing the test this application, so we are going to run in that platform, you meant in the cloud, or we have to get the software in our local system and do the testing?
No, so typically, like it's what this indicates is that your development environment needs to be similar to your production environment. So you may still do some development on your own machine, but when you try to it's test it, and we will talk about the different types of testing. When you start doing an integration and system testing, that needs to be in a cloud platform.
Oh, okay.
So all this says is the system supposed to deploy in the cloud on the cloud platform, which is Microsoft Azure. There are other platforms available like AWS, from Amazon. Google has their own cloud platform, but this specific here, the requirement is it needs to be deployed on the Azure platform. That's all it says. Okay, but get familiar with the terminology because these are very common terminologies. Okay, you will encounter in the real projects, real life projects. I mean, pretty much different types of applications. Most common is a web-based application, and pretty much these days everybody is going to the cloud for infrastructure and platform. What it means is the application will be running in the cloud, which is accessible through the internet. Okay. All right. Shall we move on?
Yep.
Any other question? If not, we can move on. Okay.
Let's go
And
to,
if you guys remember, I mean, if you think of anything, we can obviously discuss later as well. Okay. It's not like while we are on this section, we will discuss. Okay.
okay. So this section 2 talks all about the functional requirements, right? Starting with the context diagram. So can anyone explain what this context diagram means to you and how to interpret it?
Is it with how Arfloan is going to be used between the lender, the shops, and then the dealers? But what I didn't understand from the diagrams and this whole thing is that the customer is not able to like submit their own application. It only has to deal with the dealers and the shops, if that makes sense. So will the dealers get the information from the customers? Because
Yes. So you hit it on the nail, right? So this diagram does talk about how the users interact with the system to perform what type of request or functionality. And then if you'll read it in your business problem statement, right, the bullet A, right, which clearly tells it that, hey, the dealers or the employee working at the dealer will create the application on behalf of customers who wants their car to be fixed. Right. So if you go typically to, let's say, to a car service guy, right? Usually you don't have access to the computers and their systems. You are just talking to a salesperson who is behind the counter, and then that salesperson is taking care of all of your requests in the computer. So they're just utilizing the same model.
okay.
Anyone else wants to take a stab at explaining the process? What's the trigger here? What triggers the process here based on the context diagram that you have?
The payment calculations.
Actually, it's saying how the users are using the system, like the dealer user and the lender user, how they're using and connected to the system.
Right.
But I think it's you pointed out, right? So the payment calculation is the first thing they will typically do it. What comes after that? So once the dealer does a payment calculation,
Submit the credit card application to the system.
okay, then what happens?
Then it's go to the
Notification.
yes, that's a notification.
Notification to who?
Lenders.
Okay.
Okay, so this flow here, okay.
Yeah.
Then what happens?
Then the lender
approve the approval reject. Yeah, the credit application approval reject.
Okay. So it happens that. Then what happens after that?
Then same notification is being sent to the dealer.
Notification to the dealer. Yeah.
What happens after that?
Then loan review report. Then
The report are generated and the dealer can able to see whether the lender has approved or not, and the reports are being generated.
Yeah. So the only thing is that the reports are not meant to just tell the lender or a dealer that a lender has approved or not, right? That notification is going to tell them that, yes, you can go ahead and service this request. Here is the loan information and so on. What the loan review reports are essentially talking about, hey, as a dealer, how many requests I have submitted, how many are got approved, how many has I kind of fulfilled it. So those kind of reporting it, and a lot of other reports that essentially tells the dealer how effective or useful this system has been for them to increase their sales.
So what I understood here is that email notification is going to the dealer's, email address, not the application, right?
Hold on to that thought yet. We will talk about those details a little bit later. Okay.
Right. So this is where the 3C part of the validation comes in, right? Because as you look through it, right, do you feel it's complete just by looking at this? Or do you need an additional information, which is probably somewhere later in the documents are? Right?
I feel that each process should be defined more to do any kind of testing.
Which if you read the document, right, there is a lot more detail at the later stage. So that's where, when I was talking about, hey, is it complete? It is talking about, hey, do I have a reference here? It started giving you a little bit of overview. Do I have the enough detail? And that's what it is in the later part of the document. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, Harshal, if you can move to the next section, which is 2.2, which talks about functional diagram. So when you guys looked at this, what information you got about the system?
That Arfloan will basically be managing all of these for the managed dealers, managed users, lenders, loan calculators. So basically they'll be
Managing
yeah.
I feel this is a different component of this application, which the dealer is going to go through while processing.
Or they have the platforms for all of the things right here at the bottom. Basically, Arfloan is what's it called? Supporting all of the people, all of these things at the bottom, if that makes sense.
Well, so you got somewhat in that direction, but it's not entirely. So think about it, right? Arfloan is a system.
Or we
Right.
can say the application.
You can say an application,
Oh,
right?
that's what I just heard.
But the aspect is, what are the components that make up that application? Is what this one is talking about, right? So functionally, if I have to break down that application into different modules, which talks about each of the functionality or capability, how would I break it down? That's what this view talks about it. It says that, hey, my Arfloan.com application itself, or in this case, system, it's kind of broken down into 7 logical groupings of functions. And those are like managed dealers, managed users, managed lenders, all the way up to reports. Okay. So this tells you, hey, I have a big system. The first diagram talked about what is the context, how this system will be used, right? So it gave you a view of how dealers and lenders will interact with the system to use it. Then this diagram says that how that system is going to be broken down into different functional components, right? Now, again, remember, these are functional components. The physical architecture and the implementation could be completely different. Goes back to one of the architecture that we have looked at it, right? All the way from monolithic to client server to multi-tier to the mobile architecture, right? It could be any one of them, but that's I would say, the technical layer. This is essentially a business view of what all functionality it provides. Okay. It's good.
So I got a question. Will we use these diagrams to set up the test cases?
You
or
would.
Like, will we use like the, okay.
So as we go talk more about the testing and quality assurance components, we'll also talk about the various reports and metrics that you use it to track the progress or communicate the progress. And one of them is, hey, what functionality is already working, what functionality is still under test, those kind of things. So you will use this one. Typically, the designers and application members utilize this diagram to think about how logically they should group the functionality. Okay.
All right, and also who creates the requirements specification? Is it the software testers, the business analysts, or
So
the software
typically,
engineers? Who creates this diagram, or like what the requirement specification? Who creates that?
so typically it's a combined effort between your business analyst and the business users, right? Business analyst could be part of the development team, or they could be part of a group which is dedicated on the business side to help them to compile these things.
Yeah, you will never create this type of documents or requirements. Okay, you may participate in the requirement sessions, but you are not responsible for documenting and getting working with the business directly. Okay, in the agile world, the things have changed, but again, business analyst or the product owner, they are the ones actually collects the requirements, documents it, and communicates to the development team. Where typically QAs are part of the development team. Then you have the developers, software developers or software engineers. They are part of the development team as well.
Gotcha.
Can we say this one component as one business process?
I would not relate business processes to the functional components. There may be more than one business process per component. Sometimes you're going to have a business processes that essentially spans multiple components or capabilities from multiple components.
Yeah, essentially, I mean, when you look at this, so there could be multiple business processes this diagram has. If you think it that way, like submitting the loan application to getting the notification back for the approval or rejection, that's a one business process. You can consider that. And it will span multiple components. If you really look at it, it will go through the loan calculator, submit credit application, approval, rejections, and so forth, right? So the business process is a little bit bigger terminology than the actual functionality or functional decomposition. Or individual functions. All right. Any other question on this particular diagram? Okay, if not, then we can move on.
So this is where the business processes are, right? So when you were talking about business processes, they are more targeted to what are the key things that we needed to build in the system that supports our business capabilities, right? To think of this way. So one of the things, the capabilities is, hey, I'm going to have somebody who is going to sign up the dealer shops to be part of this platform, but then you may have to do some sort of management. Sometimes you may have to update the information. Sometimes some additional attributes comes in. So there's going to be an update. Sometimes you say, hey, after sometimes the dealer may decide that, hey, you know what, I don't want to be part of this platform, right? So you may want to like set it up something that this are not active dealer or active dealer, those kind of things. So the whole process that the business does it around, it's typically a managing the dealer shops, right? So when you're trying to do the managing of those dealerships, what this one lays out is what is the process that the system is going to be interacting it in order to support that business process. So often you will see it not necessarily the entire end-to-end business view, but it's only the business view in the context of the application. Right? So this one lays out is essentially what is that process means, right? So as part of the detailed description, but then it also tells it what starts or kickstarts this business process. So in this case, agent's going to go ahead and sign up the dealers to that platform. So that when agent goes to the dealership and then makes an agreement with them to be part of the platform, that's when this process starts in. Okay. And then it talks about it is, hey, if I'm done with this particular process, well, what does system would look like after that, right? So essentially, if you look at it, it is laying it out saying that, hey, once I'm done creating a dealer shops in the system, the users who work at that dealership should be able to log into this site and should have an access to the loan financing functionality so that they can essentially create a credit applications for their customers.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you think about it, right, it gives you what starts and when it ends it, what should system look like or the capability look like. That's what it is. A lot of times you will hear it is, what is the precondition or the initiator activity for the business process, and what is the post condition. Then it talks about what are the different process rules are, right? So one of the process rule is, as you create it, it needs to make sure that all of the dealers will get assigned a unique franchisee number, right? And then it also talks about as, hey, as part of this process, the data that I'm going to manipulate or interact it is defined into the data section. So if you look at it, so it is kind of trying to get the dealer name, franchise number, address, and so on data. Okay. And then the second column, what it talks about it. So first column talks about what are the data attribute. And the second column talks about the CRUD capability. What it means is create, read, update, and delete. Okay. So all it just says that, hey, as part of this process, what all operations I can perform on those data elements. All it just says that it can either create it can read it, it can update it. But notice that it clearly says that it's not going to be able to delete it as part of this process. Okay. Any question? So this is where you will start focusing on your first 3C and T type of validations, right? So if I tell you that, hey, my dealers, when they create it, have they generate, is there a unique franchise number associated with it or not, right? You can easily validate and say it's yes or no answer, right? If the system is able to do it or not. But do you have enough information to make that determination?
Does anybody has any question? Let me ask one question here. Can anybody explain me who the agents are?
I think these are the representative of Arfloan company, the providers. They are the agent who signed up the dealers.
Okay, so these guys are more like a salespeople, right? So they know how the platform works. So their job is to go and knock on the door of every dealer and say, hey, you guys like to sign up? We have this nice platform and we can increase your sales. Whatever sales pitch they can come up with, right? So they are the ones actually basically, but they are more like a salespeople, as I said. So. Okay.
Yeah, and one more question, like when we write the test cases, so these rules, the business rule will be one test cases, like
we haven't really talked about testing yet, so I would hold off on those things. Let's understand the requirement, right? Because you need to have a clear picture of what you are building is as part of the system. Then only you can write the test cases, whatever that you have to do. If you don't understand the requirement, you cannot do anything. Because what you are going to do is you are going to test the business processes, making sure this business process, whatever is built in the software, it works properly, and so forth. So let's focus on the understanding the requirement, right?
Yeah. So like it's what Herschel is pointing it out, right? the whole analysis stage, the process that you need to think about is two aspects. A, do I understand it? What needs to be built? And two, do I know how I can test it to prove it, whether it is yes or no, whether it built or system fulfills it or no. Now, how I will go test about it, whether it fulfills or not, that part is going to come later, right? That's when you determine, hey, how many test cases I needed in order to test this functionality. That's the second aspect. Right now, when you're doing 3C and T, you need to focus, do you understand it? And do you have enough information to actually test that? And when you test it, can you tell it with certainty whether it meets or it doesn't meet? That's the only thing that you need to think about.
So what information on, the managed dealer shops do we have to know in order to set up the test, in order for us to translate what we see right here onto the test cases,
Yeah, so we'll walk through it as how to take the requirement and break it down and start thinking about how you're going to test it.
Got you.
The key thing is, if I say it's, hey, all dealers shall be assigned a unique franchise number during the setup. Do you know, or do you have enough information to understand how the franchise number is going to be generated so you can test it? Right?
And what if I say, no, I don't?
That's when the completeness comes in, right?
Right.
So that's where you question it is, hey, I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
How would I know what is the franchise number?
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that all the information will be in one section. You have to piece, it's like a puzzle. You have to piece parts together. The information is there in some other place in the document. So you read it twice, maybe 3 times. And try to piece, okay, if you say you don't have what is unique franchise number? And then you go back to the business and business say, hey, it's in this section number 2.4.5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because the information is provided somewhere else in the document.
Right.
Right. So you need to go through understanding, piece together the things, and basically, yeah, that's how it works. I mean, in the real life as well. Nobody writes perfect document, right? So they will give you certain piece of information that, depending on who is writing it, it will be all different. If I'm writing it, if Dilip is writing it, it's going to be completely, it might look a similar structure, but the style of writing will be different for both of us.
I got you.
But there is a pattern for the franchise number, like state where the dealer
right. That's where you see it, right? What Herschel was talking about.
Yeah.
There is a part of the piece here. When you go through it, that's part of the reason why you look at it, the entire document, to say it's okay. Does it make sense? Sometimes you read it 2 or 3 times, right? And again, everybody has a different ways and techniques to do it, right? So you go in here and say, flag it and says, hey, I need to understand what is a franchise number. So as you read the remaining document, it says, did I get that answer? And if it's yes, then it's complete. If no, that's when you said, wait a minute, I don't know exactly how the franchise number is going to generate it. I need to go back to my business analyst or a user and says, can you tell me a little bit more about how those franchise numbers are generated so that I can figure it out whether they are unique or not. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So every process will have an input and it will give an output, right?
Well, not always, right? You may have a process which may just take an input and update the system accordingly. Doesn't have to have an output. Some processes, like think about it, right? When you are doing it, a calculator, right? And you have a stored memory function, there is no output, right? All it just does is it stores it and just tells you whether it's successful or not. Versus if I do 2 plus 2, there is an output, that number 4, right? So it depends on specific process to process, but most of the times either you will get an output or you will get some sort of an indication which indicates whether that process was successful or not.
All right, shall we move on to the next process? Okay.
So what you're going to see it is you're going to now start seeing a similar pattern in the document, right? So you had a process first one, which was a manage dealerships.
Mhm.
This one is around manage users. So it's going to talk about same thing as what time this process gets kicked off, right?
Mhm.
Essentially, whenever I want to add a new user to Arfloan, then what happens when this process gets completed? Now, this one, if you look into the detailed description, there is additional information, right? So now, if you go back to your functional decomposition, there are a lot of functionalities that the system is broken down into. So the table here tells you, hey, based on the type of the user I am, I can access this kind of functionalities.
Mhm.
So what it means is, hey, when I'm creating a dealer users, one of the things I need to validate once I create it is as a dealer, I should have access to manage users, loan calculator, and submit credit application functionality in addition to the reporting, right? If they are able to see it a manage dealer functionality, then obviously there is some questions, right? That system may not be working as expected. But this gives you information around how the security is set into for those users when you create it, who can access what functionality. Another aspect is also that gives you an opportunity to validate 3C and T. So is this information is present at multiple places in the sets of document, then you need to make sure it's consistent. Because if one area tells you as a dealer, I have an access to approving or denying credit applications.
Mhm.
Other part of the document says, no, they don't have it, then obviously there is a discrepancy, right? So from you as a user, you're trying to understand, am I going to have that functionality or not? Should I be testing it or not? That's what you need to think about as quality assurance person. Users will see it. Can I see this functionality or not when I log into the system? Okay. So all the other things, if you look into the trend is same, it gives you an additional detail. In this case, there are additional details which are like it's 6 business rules, which talks about an additional level of processing, right? So if you look at it, some of the description talks about the same information which is up on the table, which is lender user can either approve or deny credit application. So you need to make sure, is it consistent with what's said in the table, right? So any questions as you go through it? Same thing you have it is essentially CRUD, what information is going to be updated or not.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
There's a super user and site administrator. Are both the same?
For most part, they will be, but again, you need to look into the detail and says, hey, what it is, right?
Okay.
Sometimes your site administrator is going to have additional capabilities.
Okay.
Because they need to manage the site or perform the functionality that may be in addition to your traditional functional requirements.
Okay.
Super user is essentially, as it says, it's a user of the system. It's not administrator of the system.
Yep.
Mhm.
Right? Sometimes some of the applications you may be synonymous. That means your super user has the same privileges as your site administrator, or they may be just using the same term for both of that.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So in the context of Arfloan, right? Specifically, yes, they both are same. Site
Okay.
administrator, the terms is used interchangeably.
Okay.
So, yep. But they both are essentially do the same function here.
I have a really quick question. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
completely missed it.
Yes,
I
sir.
heard you a couple times mentioning 3C and T.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
Somebody else from the class want to take on that question?
Uh,
Means to
um,
basically see if the document is correct, consistent, and complete. And then the 3Cs is also to see if it's accessible, traceable, and I forgot the last.
Nope, that's it. You got it, all of them.
Testable and testable.
Yep, pretty good. So Neil, does that help?
Yes.
So every time when you look the requirements, right?
Yeah.
You utilize those conditions to make sure you understand the document, understand how the system is going to work, and you have enough information to be able to test the system. That's all it.
Okay.
A way to validate those kind of statements.
Gotcha. To make sure everything's all the information is presentable.
Yeah.
You have it here too.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the only thing, yeah, I mean, not only thing, but the important thing to watch out here is the consistency, right?
Yes.
On the right now, what we have on the screen. So you have these different users, and they have access to different functionality. Now, in anywhere else in the document, if you see something similar, and they talk about different access for the same user, or the like super user. If they say they can approve or reject credit application, right, in the some other section. So it causes conflict in the requirement, and that is the consistency,
right,
that you want to watch out for. Okay. Obviously, completeness is, do I understand this requirement? Is it complete? And we're gonna see some examples of completeness. I think a little bit in a minute. So that's all it is. I mean, so you need to be able to put together all the pieces, make sure you understand, and identify any gaps in the requirement.
Thank you.
Okay. And that's what essentially you guys do when you are given this type of requirements, right? This is the quality assurance activity that you perform as a QA, because developer is getting the same document. They will do the same thing. They will go line by line, and can they code it based on these requirements? Or can they design anything based on these requirements? Same thing, can you test it from your standpoint, from the quality assurance standpoint? So, okay. All right. So I think, as Dilip said, you're gonna see the pattern here for in the document. Now you have manage lender functionality or process, and what happens or what triggers it, and what happens after it completed.
Yeah. So that's the consistency, right? In the documents that you can see, it's a pattern. There are 6 processes that they've laid it out. So I'll fast forward. Is anybody have any questions on section 2.3.x, right? Which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 processes.
Is it mandatory for a business rule to be present, or it cannot be? It's not needed as well.
You don't have to have.
Okay.
All it just tells you is what are the conditions on there.
Okay.
So sometimes you may have the business rules. Sometimes the functional requirement may capture all the business rules.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's either way, right? As Herschel pointed out earlier, it will a lot of times it'll depend on the style of the person who is writing it. They may decide that, hey, I want to consolidate all of the rules and functionalities into one place, or sometimes they may decide, hey, I'm going to give the processes separate so there is an understanding of how the business functions.
Mhm.
And then I'll provide a requirements which is much more tied to the functional decomposition instead of a business decomposition.
Okay.
Okay. But you will see it, both of those kind of variations.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Maybe I missed it. What is the difference between CR and CRU?
So CR, remember, like it's CRUD stands for, C is for create, R is for read, U is for update, and D means for delete.
Okay, thank you.
So
I got it.
all I'd just say is that when you're trying to submit a credit application,
Mhm.
you can't update the credit application status, or you can't delete that particular component. All you can do it is create a new credit application status, or you can read it.
Okay.
So why does it not have the delete on there? Is that when we implement the 3Cs and say that's not correct, that it doesn't have the delete option?
No, so I would not just say it's incorrect. You should ask the questions, right? So that's where you should flag it. Hey, I don't understand it. Can you help me understand it? The way all of the financial data related systems work is because there is a regulatory obligation to maintain all of the information which is related to your financial aspects. So if they provide you ability to delete it, you're going to violate that federated mandate requirement, right? So when you ask the question, hey, why this one doesn't have an update or delete, that's a fair thing that you should ask it to understand the context, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that it doesn't mean, if you have a question, that doesn't mean that requirement needs to be modified, right? All it enables you is to get you the understanding of the context. And sometimes it may be missing, right? So sometimes they look at it based on your question that says, yeah, I should be able to update it, even though I may not be able to delete it, right? So that could happen, right? But yes, you should apply the rules of 3C and T to say, hey, does that make sense? If not, then let's talk about it.
Okay.
One more question. There is a column as source. So source, does it mean that where we will get the data?
Yeah, so typically a lot of times you want to do for traceability. If you're getting a requirement from multiple users, you may track it to understand which user has provided this. So when there are questions or follow-up things that you want to do it, you can actually go back to that source and have that conversation.
Okay, so here for this process, right? So they have listed the source as a credit application itself, which has instead of listing out individual fields, just like other sections. So they just say, please refer to this particular credit application printout for more information on the data elements. So that's what is listed under source. So when you are analyzing something, you have to go through this particular application to see what information they are capturing in the system as part of this submit credit application and understand that.
Right. So this goes back to the completeness, right? So if somebody would have given you a link to the document but did not provide the document, then there is a completeness issue, right? But in this case, right, they've given you attachment as a document. So if you had looked at it towards the end of the document, there is a 4-page credit application also listed, which is same as this one. So now you have a reference, and then you actually have the document which is referred to. Okay.
All right. Move on from here. Okay. Any question on this process? Okay.
Okay.
No question, then we'll move on.
Right. So sometimes in addition to the business process level rules, you may have an organizational or the functional rules. So in this case, that is not such. So therefore, the section 2.4 is an empty.
Yeah.
Right. This is a template. Sometimes you may not see that section altogether.
Okay.
So the next one, it talks about how the security works into the system. Because they talked about anytime you interact with more than one type of users, you want to understand it is which user type has what access to what functionality, right? And how the overall security is implemented. So obviously, like it's think about it as you were talking about the banking example, right? So in bank, you may have, as a typical end users, you are going to have user ID and a password. Obviously, my user ID and password is going to be different than Herschel's, right? So that's one aspect of the security. The other aspect is there may be a tailors as well as for the customers at the bank, right? So your tailors is going to have a little bit different capabilities, right? They should be able to pull others' accounts, versus I, as a user, should not be able to pull anybody else's account, right? So those kind of things becomes a system security in the specifications. So this particular section is talking about how the functionality around accessing the different functions works in this particular thing. So it talks about what all things site administrator can access it. What are the things dealer can access it? What are the things that your lender can access it? Remember, we had the salesperson or Arfloan rep. So what are those agents are able to access? What should be their managers able to access it? Okay, so that's what this section talks about. Now, as Herschel pointed out, right, you need to think about consistency. Well, did you recall seeing the security information somewhere else before? Where?
While logging, like when the dealer want to log in.
No, so when you looked at it, right, there was a process to create a user, which talked about which user should have what capabilities, right? You guys remember that business process? Section
Manage user.
2.3.2,
Okay, manage users, yes.
right? That section 232 essentially had a table which laid out who has access to what functionalities.
Yes.
Need to make sure whatever is said there is consistent with what has been laid out here.
Yeah. I see a difference in a dealer user. In a dealer user, dealer has to manage the user also. In 2.3.2, it's saying the dealer user can manage the user, but in the 2.5, it's not declared.
Right, so that's, if you see that, right, that's what you should flag it and says, hey, I need to have further conversation with the business users who provided this functionality, is that which one is right? Should dealer have an ability to create the users, or should they not have it? Right, so that's the conversation you should have it with your business users. Okay. Any other questions on this section?
Yes, real quick. So on this, all these user role are decided already. So all like our job going to be like we are checking that whoever created the website, they're assigned to proper role.
Not necessarily it's created, right? So as part of the functionality, you should be able, so if I have to test the create user functionality, you will be actually creating the users. But when you create the user, right, you need to know what type of user you're creating. And then how do you know what all system access that they should have it? That's what you should be validating and testing.
Okay. So somebody already give them access, right? So if you're just making sure that.
No, you are testing team, right?
Okay.
So there may be a 1 or 2 users might have been given to you to get started.
Gotcha.
But you have to still create the other types of user and validate it that they can do the functionality that what the document lays out.
Okay, makes sense.
So essentially, you need to wear different user set as a tester, and basically test the system based on what that particular user is supposed to do or can do and cannot do, and work through that testing process. And when we actually talk about testing, it should be more clear, but that's your job as a QA. So test each and every piece of functionality, making sure it works properly.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay.
All right. So this one, it's essentially user case diagrams or usability diagrams, right? So it talks about which user has access to what functionality, right? And how does those functionality related? So that's again, this is where you need to go back for consistency and validation.
Yeah.
Then the next section talks about specific requirements. So I see there is a typo. It should be a managed dealer shops, right? But when you look at it, like it's, hey, when I want to build the functionality of the dealer shop management, what all are the requirements the system should fulfill? So if you look at it, section 1.3 here, or requirement 1.3, talks about how actually the franchise number is generated. So remember the business process. The rule is that every dealer shop will have a unique franchise number. This is how it's generated. So if I create two different dealers, then it needs to make sure that there are two unique franchise numbers generated for them. Okay. Sometimes you will see the requirement that was laid out in the business process also defined here. So for example, requirement 1.2, it is somewhat more or less kind of similar to what was in the business process.
But essentially, you will end up combining business process and the requirements to get a clear picture of that particular function.
Yep.
So that's the part of the puzzle that you need to solve as a QA. Okay. Any question on any of these requirements? And we will take a look at these requirements closely, but you need to have a general understanding of who is performing the work, when these requirements come into the play, what business process and who is performing the work and how they are actually doing it. So
yeah, so in a sense, right, what should be the behavior of the system should be.
Right.
That's what you're talking about here.
I have a question. So request 1.5, this the system must have validated the date of each reading to be a valid date. What does that mean?
So all it just says that as a user, right, when they're entering the date, they should be able to enter only the valid date. So if I kind of try to enter February 30, it should flag it and says, oh, it's not a valid date.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I got a question. So what does business unit priority mean, and also business rule reference? I know the business rule cross reference is blank, but what does it mean?
So let's talk about the business unit priorities first, right? So typically when we talk about specifically in the agile world, as well as the other software development methodology, right? There are things that you will attack first or are more value. Things that would be, hey, it will be nice to have it. And things which is, if you get a time, then let's do it. Otherwise, it's not that critical, right? So based on that, you identify what are the business priorities are. And essentially what it means is, as part of risk mitigation strategy, if I don't have enough time to implement all the functionality, then the conversation comes in, what functionality I should implement first. That's where the business unit priority helps you to determine that. Anything which is higher, definitely the business would like it, those functionality first, before anything which is defined as a medium or low. Right?
Who decides that? Is it like a computerized, or is like a person?
No,
Is that
it's essentially your business, whoever is paying for it, right? So in this case,
like a customer?
Arfloan, yeah, the customer who is paying for the software, right? So in this case, it'll be arfloan.com site.
Okay.
Or your stakeholders. In general term, it's a stakeholders that will define the requirement priority.
Okay.
Now, the second aspect is business rules cross-reference. So sometimes you may have a lot of business rules, and the system may essentially indicate that, hey, this requirement is in the context of that particular business rule. So that's when you will see some of those cross-reference.
For example, if I have to requirement 1.2 and 1.3 here, right? So I can technically have a requirement that says each dealer shop must be assigned unique auto-generated unique franchise number. But you can also put a cross-reference for the actual calculation, which is nothing but requirement 1.3. So again, you can separate out the rules versus the actual requirement. And here, I mean, depending on who is writing it, it will differ from there. But essentially, it referring to the additional information, or referring to the what is the business rule that it ties to this particular requirement. So.
Okay. And then again, you will see the similar pattern, right? So if you scroll it down to section 262, 263, all of those things are there. Okay. So when you're reading through those requirements documents, you should apply 3C and T. Can I have a complete picture, and can I test it? Okay.
Okay. Any question up to 2.6.6?
Yeah, so like, okay, so do you see how we have 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4? Do those go in chronological order based off of importance, or is it just like stuff that we can reference back to?
Yeah, so it's typically based on however the business identified, right? I would not presume that that is a priority order by default, unless user specifies that. All it just says that, hey, I have 4 requirements, and here are the 4, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. Sometimes they may say, hey, you know what? The 2.1 and 2.2 are the high level, and 2.3 and 4 are related to that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So do we need to take action on all of the requirements, or do we just read them?
So for you, at this point, it will be reading and understanding it.
Okay.
So when you go to write the test cases, then that's when you relate it and says, okay, the sets of test cases are for this requirement and so on.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on to the next section?
It's required 2.2. Can you please explain, like it says by changing status, what does means like?
So let's think about it, right? So for credit applications,
Mhm.
what are the normal life cycle statuses are, right? Somebody created it or submitted, right? The next one would be pending review by lender. Then it'll be either approved or rejected by the lender.
Mhm.
And the last might be, hey, my dealer finished all the work, so they are flagging it that this request is complete now.
Okay.
Right? So that's what the status are. And all the requirement just says that, hey, all lender has to do it to approve something is change the status to approve or change the status to reject.
Okay.
Right? Because if you look at the other requirement 2.3, which says that, hey, lender should not be able to modify anything else.
Mm.
Right?
So I have one question, like the lenders are many or the lender is one? Whenever the, the dealer send a request or whenever he submit an application, does it go to different lender or does it go to a particular lender?
So that's a good question. Right? So you jot down. Did you find answer of that question to anywhere else in the document?
Because I see this managed lender, it is saying that is ability to search lender by lender name. If it is saying that, that means we can, if we search something, that means it is more like more than one lender, right? So
Yep.
that's where this question came. Yes.
But it can be more than one lender.
So if it is more than one lender, then the application is going to be for every lender or to a specific, like, is there any criteria to define a lender whom it is going to be sent?
That's where you need to read the rest of the document to see, is it a one-to-one relationship? Whenever somebody submits a credit application to a lender, or is it one-to-many relationship? So that means when I submit one credit application, it goes to 5 different lenders, and then each lender will have their own terms and condition and a percentage rate that I can use it to make a determination who I give the business to, right? That could be a possibility of a business requirement. It's just a matter of you reading the rest of the document. And then if you still don't get an answer, flag it for discussion with your business analyst and the user. And that's typically true for most of the requirements, that you flag it first, have a conversation within your team. And if you're able to resolve within the team, it's good. If not, you may have to go back to your end user to get that additional detail.
So any kind of question like you will have, he or she is going to the BA, otherwise the stakeholder, right?
Right.
From there,
BA and or stakeholder, right? So if you're using agile methodology, typically your users, a business analyst, are like it's heavily engaged throughout the process, right? So you essentially have that conversation there.
Yep, as a QA, you will never assume, right? That's a rule of thumb for QA. You will always clarify the requirement. If you don't understand something, you will go to the BA. And otherwise, you go to the business if business analyst is not available. If you are working with the product owner in the agile teams, you discuss with the team and get the clarification at that point.
Yeah, so Harshal brought out a very good point. As a QA, one of the most important rule that you follow is you don't make up your own requirements. Anytime you have questions, you don't assume the answers. You actually go to the source, which could be a business analyst or your end users, and get clarity around that source.
Okay.
Can you go to the next section, Harshal?
Yeah.
Okay. So then the next section talks about, hey, what kind of training requirements, right? So when you're building a system, sometimes the system may be intuitive for people to use it. Sometimes, depending on the skill and the work that we require, you may require to train people into the system use. That's all it just talks about. The next section talks about the reporting requirements and what kind of report will be seen, what type of users.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah. When do we report, the documents or like whatever we've done to whoever? Like when do we, is it at the end, in the middle, or does it matter? Or like does it have to deal with like the type of methodology we're using?
What was your question? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Yeah,
Can
my
you
bad.
repeat? Yeah.
So when do we report, like when we're done with testing the bug or finding the defect? Like when is
We
that
haven't
process?
really talked about that yet. So hold on to that. Hopefully it will clarify after third session or maybe fourth. So. Okay. Now, I'm assuming you are not referring to this report here. And you are talking about the bugs and defects and so forth.
Oh, I thought it was the same thing, honestly. That's why when I said report, yeah.
No, that is a different. This is part of the requirement, the reporting requirements.
Okay.
This is the what system supposed to produce based on basically what they should be able to produce from the system. Those type of reports, which are different than the actual bug report or defect report. This is actually the end users will have access to this functionality. That's what we are talking about here.
So while understanding the requirement, do a tester need any kind of documentation being done before any tests start, or
so
we are only going
define documentation for me. Give me an example. So what kind of documentation you have it in your mind?
like some kind of if this then that, some kind of Excel or.
Well, those are requirements, right? So if you think about it, you will follow the same rule, right? Whether it meets 3C and T. If it doesn't, right, then you flag and say we need to have better understanding of this requirement. And that interaction is going to happen with the users or a business analyst, depending on whoever provided you those requirements.
So do you mean to say that if I don't understand 2.7 reporting requirements, so I will be copying this and write down my point of, analyzing it?
No,
So,
you go ahead, Dilip. Yeah.
So think about it, right? Is at the end of the day, if you don't have a good understanding, where are you going to go get that understanding, right? That's what it boils down to in my mind. So the main thing that I would focus on during this one is just to simply, do I have a good understanding of what needs to be built or what will be built? And do I have enough information that I can test around it? As long as you're able to do those two things, right? That's all it is in the analysis phase. Because remember, when is this document is coming to you in the analysis phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
We haven't started in the design. We haven't started in an implementation yet. So your analysis should just focus on, is it testable? Is it complete, correct? Do I have a good understanding of it? That's all it is.
Okay.
Now, as a good QA, you will have to test each and every piece of functionality that is laid out in the requirement. So you need to understand, and if you don't understand certain things, you need to start asking questions until you understand fully what this requirement means. If there is anything missing, certainly the business analyst can collect that information and put it in the document as well. They can always revise the document or clarify the requirement for you.
Yeah, and think about it, right? So I'm going to give you example back that we talked about building a house, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you feel that the dimension of the house that you're talking about is not accurately talked from a blueprint to a requirement, are you going to hold on to saying that till actually the house is built?
No.
You're going to say it as soon as you become aware, right?
Sure. Mm.
Why? Because once somebody builds it, to go back and fix it is very expensive, right? You have to break it and rebuild it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus when somebody gave you just a blueprint and gave you, hey, I want to have a 2-story house, but on the blueprint says it's a ranch house. That means it's only 1 floor. You're better off flag it right there, right? To minimize the cost of rework. True?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you do it in the system also. As soon as you become aware, you raise the flag and says, hey, look, guys, I don't have understanding. Can we talk about it? Can I get a better understanding about it? Right? Because if you don't have that understanding and you wait until your system is built and you're ready to test, and if they say, yeah, you're right, it's not accurate, it's too late, right? You have to rebuild it, everything. So that's the mindset that you need to think about it as you go build it. Any artifact as a quality assurance person is as soon as you identify a defect, you should raise it to get it fixed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Question.
Mm-hmm.
So how would we identify the defects and stuff like that?
So we will talk about the defect tracking management a little bit later.
Okay.
But think about it, right? For now, you can just flag it and say, hey, we don't understand this requirement. Can we talk about it?
Okay.
Right.
Because
So
in
that's
order
what
to
you
do
can.
any kind of testing, you need to understand the requirement. Otherwise, you will not be able to complete the test, or you will not be able to conduct testing. So get the bigger picture in your mind of the Arfloan. Okay, that's the process you should be following for any project, not just Arfloan. Understand the requirements, understand who the users are, understand what the business processes are, how the functions work, and what are the detailed requirements, so that you have a clear picture in mind for the system. And then we talk about, okay, how I'm going to test it, basically.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the, go ahead, Dilip. Do you have anything?
Yeah, no, I was just going to talk about the next section.
Okay.
Talks about what are the data elements.
Right.
And what is the relationship, right?
Right.
So when you look into Appendix A, that's where everything is defined, right? So we'll look at Appendix A when we come down to that. So the next section, section 3, talks about your non-functional requirements. So these are typically the operational characteristics of your system, right? So it talks about the audit capability, availability, exception handling, the scalability, and those kind of requirements is, hey, how long my system should be up? How many users are able to use the system at the same time? remember the Amazon example that we talked about? When a million user logs in, am I expected to still have the same performance? Or it is okay to degrade it as long as there are up to 10,000 concurrent user, if it should behave the same way. Those kind of requirement goes into this section. Okay, so I'm going to just ask broadly any specific question you have it in the section 3. All right, so let's go to then the appendix.
Okay.
So remember, like there was a last section within the requirements document referred to the business data and attributes. So that's all this is about. Later in the class, we'll talk about the database and cardinality and the relationship between the information. But essentially, what talks about it is, hey, what are the relationship between the dealer versus credit application versus lender? Is it one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many? What kind of relationship? That's what it boils down to when you get this set of requirements.
Okay.
Okay, and that essentially covers your requirement specification document.
Okay. Before we jump to the other document, any question on the requirements? Hopefully you guys can read one more time, at least since now you have a little bit more clarification. Hopefully you can read one more time before Saturday. And that will help you, okay?
Yeah.
For whatever work we are going to do on Sunday, actually, start working through on Sunday. So you have between tomorrow and maybe Saturday. I would suggest if you have time tomorrow, just go through it again, the requirements document. Because it's important for you to understand the requirements. Without that, you have to spend time on it, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Harshal, if you can switch
1
it.
minute.
Uh-huh.
So do you want us to go through all of it or just the requirements? Like if we do have time tomorrow?
I would recommend go through both requirements and design document.
Okay.
Right? Because if you look at it, right, Harshal, if you can switch it to the design document, it's more or less kind of similar structure. It essentially enables you additional details, right? So typically the design document is built by the development team or system lead developers. And it talks about, given the requirements that was laid out in the requirements document, what approach I'm going to take it to implement that particular capabilities in the system. So this is where you start identifying things like what kind of architecture I'm going to use it, right? Specific data detail, how big each of the fields and attributes are going to be, how each one of them, what type of attributes going to be. So as you look through it, right, it tells you what are the characteristics of the system, how each one of the, like there will be a context diagram, there will be a functional diagram. It talks about the security, how I'm going to retain the data, what is my data structure is going to look like. So if you look into the section 4, which is essentially talking about all of the data concerns, whether it's a logical or contextual, and then you go into integration aspects, what are the architectural aspects, those kind of things. So often you see it, this one is a system design document is further detailing it out from the requirements document, or a lot of times it's an augmenting additional information from a tester's point of view or quality assurance point of view of how the overall holistically the system is going to look like.
Yeah, couple of sections I want to emphasize here, the integration context, right? What are the interfaces that system is doing? Because that's something you will end up testing, those interfaces. Okay, so that's the important section number 5. And then other things you will watch out for. What are the system characteristics, right? I mean, whatever is laid out in the business requirements document, you might find more details or more clarifications around system characteristics, number of users, and so forth. Now that is helpful for the load tester, performance testers, and so forth. But they are like kind of like a specialized testers, so they will be looking at that information as well.
Yeah. And then the other aspect you look into is the logical data model. So as you go through it, right, you have to build the different data elements to test. So how are you going to build the data element? So that insight you get it when you look at the logical data model. As I was saying earlier, what type of each of the elements or attribute is, what are the valid values, and so on.
Yeah, because as a QA, you will end up writing queries using SQL most of the time, depending on what database they are using in the backend. So that's something understanding data model is very important in that context, because without the understanding the data model, you will not be able to write queries much. So that is important section for you as well. So let us just quickly go through that. I think we still have 30 more minutes, so we can take a look at it as well.
Yeah.
So let me jump to section 2 here. Yep, go ahead, Dilip.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I want the teams, the class to drive the review of this through questions. So any questions on the section 2.1, which is about system characteristics in terms of what are the business area, what are the number of users expect, how does that overall relate it?
Quick question. While reading this, I didn't really understand the what they meant. Is it for the
I don't know about others, but I think you're cutting it off. So I was not able to hear the entire question. Can you repeat it?
I don't understand.
Yeah, same here. I think C is having some internet issue.
So if you want to, like, it's kind of put your question in the chat, then we can look through it.
Hello, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So here number 4 page 8, the disaster recovery business, which is written tier 2. But if you go back the one, so
requirements document.
Yeah, the requirement that's a written tier 3 application.
Sure.
Yeah. So what happens is sometimes the business may ask. So if you look into the disaster recovery and the definition of each of the tier, the tier 3 essentially says business is telling you, hey, as long as you can recover it within a week, they are good. But the architecture and the cloud nature, what they are talking about is that, hey, we can recover that within 24 hours.
Okay.
So which is fine, right? As long as you don't give a degraded service, the business will be okay with that.
Okay.
One more question. Actually, can you please go to page number 30?
On the design document or requirements?
Like before that page, basically the 4 or 5 pages before. This.
Which document you are referring to?
Yeah, there is a. Just a second.
Okay.
Signatures. There is a one sheet is like signature, I think, starting.
What are you talking about in the requirements document?
Yes, I think. Yeah, requirement requirement document. After that, after that, I think this this is the sheet, sir. I'm so sorry. What is that symbol? And I did not get what is that actually. I missed that part actually.
So we will review those later, right? But if you think about it, right next to the symbol, there is a definition, right? So if you have two entities and between those two entities, if there is a symbol which is like it's kind of drawn like the first one, it says that the relationship between them is such a way that it's an optional, which is at least 0. And the second aspect is at most 1, which is essentially to say you cannot have more than one of those things in relationships, right? So for example, right, you can say it, hey, if I'm a dealer, and then I have a relationship with the agent who signed me up, think about it, right? You can have only one agent who can sign up that dealer. You cannot have multiple agents sign up the same dealer.
Okay.
Right. So that's what it talks about it. So as you go through it, you look through a relationship between, hey, what is the relationship between credit application and lenders? So essentially, credit application can belong to only one lender, right? It can have more than one people, but your lender can essentially lend money to many people, right? So they can support more than one credit application.
So it's a relationship. So we'll talk a little bit later in the I think maybe session number 6 or 7. Talk about the relationships and entities and so forth.
No
you have to
problem.
read it both ways because relationship. So it is more like a kind of like a real life relationship. It has to, in order to make it work, you have to think it both ways, right? So here, what Dilip is saying, lender from going this way to credit application, it's 0 to many. From credit application to lender, it's 1 to 1, basically. So one credit application belongs to one lender. If I read from lender to credit application, one lender can submit many credit applications. Okay, so those terminologies will cover more further down the sessions. Yep.
Right, sir. No problem.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions in the first section in the design document?
Now you're gonna see a lot of technical terms because it's supposed to be a technical document written by architects or lead developers and so forth. So it's okay if you don't understand everything, but more you read it, more you Google it, I think that will help you certain things.
It's like a sheet already has a whole bunch of questions on it, and they tick mark whatever.
Yeah, it's essentially the characteristics, right? So depending on how you collect the information, that's what this is all about.
Right.
Okay.
It's more like architectural attributes or characteristics. They are identifying for the system or application for Arfloan.
For this specific client,
Yeah.
if there's different client requires something else, could be something.
It will be a completely different design document, which will have completely different identification or characteristics.
Okay.
Okay. Same thing goes with the next section 2.2. It essentially says that there are certain implementation decision is made and why those decisions are made, right? So one of the example is the system is going to be accessible through the internet, right? Since it contains all of the sensitive information about social security, about people's credit request and so on, obviously you want to make sure that all of the data is encrypted and when it's sent over the internet, right? Because you don't want that data to be in hand of anybody and everybody who tries to access the internet. So that's what that rule is talking about, that since there is a personally identifiable information or PII data, that we're going to go ahead and use a SSL protocol to essentially make any calls in and out of the systems. So that's an example, right? There are 3 other
Question.
rules. Yeah.
What does that mean, SSL?
It's a secure socket layer. That's a technology that used it to essentially make sure all of the data is sent is encrypted.
So typically, if you go to any website, right, you type in HTTP. So that's the typical website address. So if you go to the Google, you say http://google.com. Now, how can you tell it's using the secure layer? You have to type in HTTPS, basically. So that way it's applying the SSL protocol for website access. And whenever you're making credit card purchases, right, you can notice next time if you are buying anything online to see if the site has HTTPS in the URL. If not, don't buy from those sites because your credit card will be stolen. So it's not using secure protocol otherwise.
Yeah, the other way you can see it is whenever you are actually accessing any sites, most of the modern browsers will now have a lock indicator right next to your URL. And if it's locked, that means it's a secure connection. If it's not locked, it's kind of open connection.
Yep. Okay.
So that's the same thing like a CSV format?
No, CSV is a comma separated format. So all it talks about it is, hey, when I'm trying to it's download the report or data, it is in a comma separated format so that they can access it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So the next sets of diagrams should look a lot more familiar to you, right? So you had a context diagram. This is a different way to represent the same context diagram, right? Then essentially it's talking about
one minute. There is no number 5 on this.
Okay.
Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, but there's I don't 5.
So if I take out the number, is all of the interaction same as the requirements document?
Yes.
So that's what you flag and says, hey, this is a misnumbered versus it's a missing thing, right?
Oh, okay.
So that's the discrepancy, right? It's a consistency. So when you apply the consistency flag, it didn't fulfill that. So that's when you generate the question back.
Yeah, somebody might have missed it. That would be the question, right? So they can correct the design. This is the flaw in the design in this case, or the process they have documented here. Okay.
This is essentially gives you a high level view of how the system is going to lay it out, right? So if you think about it, it looks a lot more similar to your client server or 3-tier type of architecture diagrams. Okay. Okay. The next layer talks about security and authentication, right? So you need to make sure how the system will be authenticated, right? So how the user ID and a password will be used it versus is it going to be user ID and a biometrics, a fingerprint or any of such things, right? Sometimes you may have a token that you have to use it in addition to the password. Yep. So that's all these requirements are. The next one is talks about if I'm building an automated process, what roles they will do it, those kind of things. Same thing goes back to its by user, what kind of capabilities that they can access to it.
Yeah, it should be consistent with the requirements because they cannot change the requirement here in the design document. Okay, so if you see something missing, requirement trumps the design for these type of things.
Yeah, and you can have a conversation, right? So sometimes they said, hey, yes, the requirement document said this, but as we got the clarity and we updated in the document for the design, that time you should go back and say, okay, can we update the requirements document? Because you're going to build all of your test cases and test scenarios based on the requirements document. So a lot of these things, when you see it all, the section 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, all relates back to some of the things that was identified in the non-functional requirement section of the document, right?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
So
Pankaj.
in the design section 2.7, data retention, it's saying for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
In the requirement document, it's saying for 2 years. So which one we have to consider, in the requirement or in the design?
So what this one is telling you, and it is kind of a more, as you go through it, understand more requirements from the IT system point of view. All this one tells it is that after 6 months, I'm going to take it away from the database. You're going to store offline. I'm not deleting it.
Mm-hmm.
It is still kind of going to be stored for 2 years as required in the requirements document. All it just says, I'm keeping 6 months data online. Anything older than 6 months is staying offline.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So this context diagram then talks about what are the input and outputs coming out from the systems. So the next section, functional decomposition diagram. So essentially how the system is going to be built by using different modules. So this is implementation view versus in the requirements document, what you had was a functional view.
Okay, so this view is used by the developers, okay, to build the different components of the system. So here, like security component, loan calculator, credit application, and so forth.
This section talks about logically how the data is structured. Here you will also, as we talked later in the course, we'll talk about the database and the structure around it. That's where you will see it, that a lot of notation is referring to that. The next,
I have a doubt here.
Yeah.
If you see the page number 13, that's logical data relationship. Dealers and credit application connect to the node like 0 to more. So here, if you can see the diagram, so there's a node, but it has not connected to any like dealers or credit application.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, it's a notation, right? So it doesn't have to be connected to all the different entities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
Yep.
there could be more than one entity who could be able to generate note in the system.
Right.
Right. So that's what this is about.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So now this section goes into detail as I was talking about. Hey, when I say it's user ID, well, what exactly it is? It's a system generated field. It is of type number and it's required. And so whenever I create a user, there is always a user ID that system will generate, which is a numeric. That's all this one is telling. So this enables to give you data. Hey, whenever I'm creating a user, how all the data is going to get generated and what data I need to provide versus what is going to be system generated. Versus what are optional, right? And then you can utilize those to identify your test cases and business rules.
Yeah, it will help you for the test data as well. This particular section.
So this one entity or one table?
Typically, for every entity, which is a logical diagram, you are going to have a physical diagram,
right,
which is the logical and contextual physical data model.
So this entity is represented as an actual database table or physical from the physical model. So, so this is what it will be implemented in the backend.
I have a question.
Do
Yeah.
we
For the password, there's a login password required for the create a new user, and then they say text. It can be like a number.
Yeah, text
So
can include numbers as well, right?
yeah, so text could be alphanumeric number, right? So it could be like A123. That's still a text.
Oh, okay.
Or it can
Versus number
include
123.
yeah, or it can include special characters as well, right? Text is anything.
What's up?
Okay. Anybody else had a question? I think.
Yeah, I got a question. What's the Boolean?
True or false.
So Boolean is essentially a mathematical notation type of things where it's either true or false, or sometimes you can think about it as a specific set of value only, right? So Boolean is a special things where it will be just true or false.
1 or 0.
One,
Sometimes they
right.
refer to as.
Sometimes it's 1 or 0, right? Sometimes you will also see it's something called enum, which is essentially only a list of options that you can use it, right? So when you look into the states, right, they may restrict you to only those 50 states. You can't just go randomly pick whatever you want.
Yep.
Right? So that's kind of a set of value. That's all it is, versus your username could be anything, which could be completely free form.
Right.
So do you think we should have added one more column, like what should be the length or like that?
Well, again, remember what I said. As a tester, you never add any requirements. So
Now you
if
can
you have
request it. Yeah.
question, right,
Yeah.
you can just say, hey, when you say number, can you tell me how big of a number it can be? When you say it's username, well, is there a limitation on how big the name could be, or is it infinite? Right. So those kind of questions that you can ask it. A lot of databases now are much more to a point where when you say text, it essentially allows you a really long type of text. So you don't have to worry about that. And then it actually stores only the amount of the data, or takes only the amount of data that you actually used it. So
now where it will help you, I mean, this thing, right? If they have the number or limit or data length specified here, right? Because when you are testing it, you don't know what your test data going to be. Are you supposed to enter only 8 digit, or is there a limit on every field? You don't know, right?
yeah, so
without looking at that. So
yeah, so think about social security number, right? You want to limit that to be no more than 9 digits.
yep, same thing with the phone number, depending on, is it US phone number only, maybe 10 digit or 9 digit, and so forth, right?
Yeah, same for the franchise number also, right? Yeah.
So it will help you. I mean, if you request that, or if you identify and have a discussion with the design for the design as part of your review, then they might go and add that here, because it will help you for testing. Okay. So as you can see it, I mean, all the entities are specified here. So I would suggest you go through it and review that as part of your document review, because it's an important section for you guys. It will help you for your test data down the road.
So we are going to test the database side, or we are going to do the testing in the web application?
When we do the testing, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Sometimes you may have to do it in both places, and that's what Herschel was talking about. We'll talk into specific details. But what you need to think about it in the analysis phase is, do you have enough information so that you can test it? Where you test it, it's probably not that much of importance at this point. It will become important as you go down the different life cycle phases, then yes.
Okay. Any question on the particular section?
Now, this is where Harshal was talking about, right? What are the external interfaces and what are the interaction to those external interfaces? So there was a requirement around email notification. So this one talks about at what point Arfloan essentially interacts with the email systems.
Yeah, what is the trigger
and then which direction? As it goes from an
Yep.
email system to the system, Arfloan, or Arfloan to the email system.
Right.
So the email system, it has, it's, so when they send the email to like Appendix, is it coming from the server, email
Yeah.
server? Okay.
The email servers, right? So you always have typically like yahoo.com, Yahoo servers or Gmail servers or your Outlook or whatever the company service that you may have it.
Right. So is that, so do you know how some emails say do not respond or do not reply? Is it that?
Yeah, those could be details that you flesh it out, right? Because who is going to check it, where it goes at, right? So a lot of times when you say do not respond, is because there's nobody's checking it and it's blocked, right? Or moved to the spam as soon as you try to send it.
Okay.
all right.
Right. So the next one talks about what is the architecture used and how those layers are. And the last one talks about how actual the system is going to be laid out, right? So a lot of times it's called a page flow diagram. So essentially it says, hey, when the dealer user logs in, what are the pages gets displayed, and from that page, which all other pages they can go to, right? So in this case, if I'm a dealer, I can log in, then I can get to the dealer homepage. From there, I can either do the loan calculation, or I can submit credit application, or I can check the loan status. Okay, so this essentially talks about how the information flows within the system and how it goes outside the system.
I have a question. Can you explain, please, that inter-application layer?
N-tier is essentially, if you remember, we talked about multi-tier architecture in the class. It's exact same thing.
Okay.
Okay. This one is the important diagram for you to understand how the system supposed to be built, because that will help you for your quality assurance activities down the road. So I'm just mentioning it here. Try to understand what they are building in the system. Okay. Oh, okay. So that was the last thing.
That's it. So what I would recommend is between now and Saturday, or definitely no later than Sunday morning, read those again. Now that you understand how the information is laid out, read it again, make sure you understand, make sure you'll try to apply the 3 CNT. Anywhere you have questions, let's talk through it when we talk it on Sunday. Okay.
All right. Anything else anybody has?
Yeah, I have a question. One more question.
Okay.
So when we're asking these questions, is there something that we're referencing? Or
when you're asking the questions, right, you should reference specific section where you have that ambiguity, or that where you need the clarity, right? So somebody pointed it out, hey, the dealer's functions, there is a discrepancy. What is defined in the business process sections versus what was defined later in the security sections does not match. So that's where you flag it out. It says, hey, I'm referring to those two sections, and here is a discrepancy. I'm seeing it.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to ask open-ended question, because nobody has time to answer those, specifically the business users and the business analysts. You have to do your homework, be prepared try to understand as much as you can. Then ask the meaningful question. Basically, I mean, no question is a bad question, but more you prepare from your standpoint, more you try to put in effort to understand the requirement, so that you can have meaningful conversation and many right questions you can ask to the business. Because you can ask question once, if you repeat the same question again in the next meeting with the business, they will say, hey, we already explained to you earlier. Why are you asking this question again? And those are real world scenarios. I mean, you're gonna run into that a lot. That's why you always want to be prepared before you go to any meeting.
Okay.
I got a question.
Sure.
So where is the client during this whole process? Like, I didn't see the client in the diagram, any of the diagrams.
Are you asking about client? Can you define the client?
The client, so like the person that's getting their car repaired.
Yeah, so they are the second.
The person that's applying for the credit loan.
Right. So the reason why you don't see it anywhere, because they're never going to access the system.
Okay.
Remember, this is a system context diagram. It's in the context of the system, who will be accessing and those things, right? If the person is not going to access the system, there is no point putting them on the context diagram.
I got you.
Yeah. But you understand, you can go through the business problem, right? What they are trying to address. This could essentially become your business, high-level business process flow. You can go through this and then read the context diagram and try to figure out where the customer fits in, right? And because they are not accessing the system directly, they will be always be going to the dealer, and dealer will do the work for them. That's the reason they are not on the diagram here.
Copy.
Yeah. So that's why, I mean, we said, I mean, it's a piece of puzzle, right? You have to read different sections, try to put together a bigger picture, how this thing's supposed to work from the system standpoint. Because ultimately you have to test that and make sure everything, whatever is said in the requirement, the developers build the same thing, and you are the tester. So you have to make sure they build correctly. So that's the process you need to follow. Okay, so I think we'll start talking about how you can do that on Sunday, but I think we'll talk a little bit further on Saturday, get different types of testing and few other things out. And then we actually start building the actual artifacts as a QA on Sunday.
I got one more question.
Sure.
So, okay, I just forgot my question. My bad.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So how long would this project take? Like right here, or like this specific project? How long is it? Like a month, 2 months?
Hang on to that questions, right? What I would like you is to first focus on understanding it, and then we will talk about it when we talk about the testing and what all you need to test it. We'll talk about the duration, because to me, it's always a nebulous question, right? When people say it's how long it'll take it. Well, it depends how many people you have. You have 2 people working on it versus you have 5 people working on it, right? So let's hold on to those discussions until we get into the actual test case writing. And then you should be able to give a judgment as, hey, if I have to do all this work, this is how long it's going to take me. Okay.
Yep, those are good questions, but I think let's wait a little bit further. And I think all of your questions will be answered as we move through the camp.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I think if nobody has any question, then we'll see you guys on Saturday, 8:40 or 8:45 at the center. Those who are logging online, try to log in at 10 minutes prior.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank
Okay,
you,
then.
Thank you, Dilip. Have a
All right.
Good
All
night.
right.
Guys, Saturday.
Yeah, good
All
night.
right.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
All righty.
Chill.
Oh yeah.